Howdy, folks. Hope you're having a good one. Many of you grew up in a religious family and were otherwise indoctrinated into religion. This is ordinary in many places in the world and even parts of Europe. In Northern and Western Europe, not so much. We'll explore the vagaries of an ungodly upbringing in Denmark and the Netherlands in today's episode of The Global Atheist. Hello! Well, first of all, welcome to Björn, my Danish friend from Denmark. We're going to talk today about, being raised without religion. My parents, my dad was an atheist, my mother was raised in religion, but they decided not to do religion to their children. And so for me, religion was always something other people did until roughly at 10 when I went to a Roman Catholic school. I'll tell more about that later. Björn, how was that in your life?
Well, up until I was 6, I had actually mostly never heard about religion at all. I got sent into a Catholic school like you when I was 6. But my parents never told me about religion in advance, so it was quite a shock to me when I stood there the first day in school.
Folks, hope you're having a good one. Many of you grew up in a religious family and were. I'm awfully sorry for that. My video stream interfered. I'm sorry about that. So till 6, you were nothing of religion at all. My parents taught me about religion, but pretty much as in that's something other people do. We don't do that.
Well, back in the late 80s and early 90s when I was a kid, the only experience of religion I actually had was on Sunday when there was the Danish church choir singing songs. But there were no sermons or anything, so I didn't actually understand what was going on. To me, it was just a bunch of kids singing.
Any nice songs?
Any
nice songs? As in what kind of songs? They were religious songs or?
Yeah, they were religious songs, but since it was a big choir, I guess I never really understood what they were singing because it was like 40 voices singing. There were, several, harmonies. So it was hard to understand what they were singing if you didn't know the lyrics in advance.
Yes, of course. I recognize that from school choirs and church choirs later. Yes, I recognize that. Yeah, I went for my first 10 years. I went to a public school, and that one was set next to a Roman Catholic school, which we had nothing to do with. And those were the mildly weird kids. Not so much because they were actually weird, but they did occasionally weird things like carnival dress-ups and stuff like that. And of course, occasionally, of course, stones were thrown over the fence and stuff like that, but otherwise we never did that. But when I was 10, my parents moved to a part of the country where quite a few people were at least nominally Roman Catholics. Later on, I learned that was as in they went to church twice a year, that kind of Catholics. But anyway, the result was there was no public school in that town. So I went to a Roman Catholic primary school. That was not much of a problem because they didn't put religion on me. The only thing I encountered there was during that time the pupils did confirmation in the local church. Although they were trained or groomed for that, I wasn't. I did go to that mass, only just because it was an opportunity to see the bishop from close. It was a bit disappointing.
Yeah, in my experience was actually very horrifying. I lived right next to the school that I was about to start in, the Catholic school. So in the years leading up to starting school, I could see all the kids in the school having fun playing with each other. And I was really looking forward to having a lot of friends to play with, since I didn't really have that. And then on the very first day of school, we were all gathered in the gymnasium, the sports hall, and they were about to pray, all of them. So everybody looked down, closed their eyes, and folded their hands, and I stood around looking at them like, "What is going on?" Because I had no idea what was going on.
Yeah.
And 3 lines into the Our Father prayer, the headmaster of the school stopped the entire gymnasium of kids and pointed at me and said, "Why aren't you praying?" And I gave him the honest answer. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what to say.
Yeah.
So from that moment on, I was kind of singled out in school 5 minutes in.
Ooh, that's a bit painful. I mean,
Yeah.
I ran into that later in secondary school. Secondary school was the same thing, no public school, so I went to a Roman Catholic school, one run by monks, Franciscan monks. And before I entered, my mother and I had a chat with the principal, one of those monks in what do you call them, those brown dresses. That word for that, which I can't remember at the moment. Anyway, I think it is. Anyway, and he was an Irish bloke, and he said essentially that, well, you don't have to do the Roman Catholic bits if you don't want to go to religious education, that's fine. And I pretty much did all of that just out of curiosity. But of course, there was one thing that many lessons in the morning, first lessons, sometimes later in the day, start with a little prayer. Mostly either the Lord's Prayer or Hail Mary. And of course, I didn't pray. And that didn't escape the attention of my classmates. And so questions were asked. And that went like this. "Oh, you don't pray. Aren't you a Catholic?" "No." "Oh, you're a Protestant then?" "No."
Yeah, we since Denmark.
Occasionally, a clever one would say, "Oh, you're Jewish then?" "No." "What are you then?" "Nothing."
I had a very similar experience. After the trip in the gymnasium where everybody were gathered, we were going back to have our first class. And after the first class, we had the first recess. And in that recess, all the kids from not only my class, but the classes above us, gathered around me to ask me who I was and why I hadn't prayed along with them. And it turned out that there was a lot of different religious denominations in my school. Jehovah's Witnesses, Protestants, Seventh-day Adventists. The minority was actually Catholics. I think there was only 2 or 3 Catholics in the 30 kids in the 3 classes we were in. I was in.
Oh, that's remarkable.
Yeah, well, Denmark is mostly a Protestant country. That's very typical of Scandinavia, actually. I think it's sort of a split from the Lutheran era. The Lutheran doctrines got spread north rather than east or west.
Yeah, I mean, I was a bit familiar with Dutch Protestantism, and that's Calvinist, by the way, because my mum was raised in the Dutch Reformed Church, and that's the mainstream Dutch Protestant church. It's the same church that, at least in theory, the king is a member of. Although there's nothing like state religion in the Netherlands, we don't do that. But that's the main Protestant religion. But we have a sizable, the traditionally Catholic part of the population. Of course, nowadays, non-religious are in majority in the population. Something like 55% of the population don't do anything like religion, probably don't believe in anything concrete. What's the word? I think it's something like 20% Catholics, 15% Protestants, and 5% Muslims. And the rest, no particular religion. Not all of them say they're atheists, but many of them are.
Yeah, it's the same here in Denmark. I think about 55 to 60% say they follow the church for like funerals and baptisms and marriages, weddings, but that's all they ever do, church related.
Yeah, I think that that's true for the Dutch as well. Seem to remember the statistics that people who go to church regularly, as in say once a month and more, that's maybe 10% of the population. In that respect, Muslims are much more going to mosque once a week or maybe once every 2 weeks than Christians are. We have a few other minority religions. We have a reasonably active Hindu population, mostly descendants of immigrants from Suriname in the 1970s. Hey, kitty!
Yeah, this is my atheist cat, Miyu.
Yay! So, anyway, how was there any push for you in school to, attend mass or things like that?
I didn't have to attend mass, but that was actually quite common because mass was only for the Catholic students there. And they did have a little chapel at school, but I only saw it once during a music class in 6th grade, where we had to sing along to the organ.
Ah, yes. Yeah, my secondary school had a full-fledged chapel on the side of an ordinary church, actually. And I think they said daily mass, but I didn't follow that. But that was traditional first, beginning of the school year mass, and one at the end that. I wasn't required to attend that, but I often did.
One thing we did do that I couldn't avoid was every morning and afternoon before going home, we started and ended the day with Our Father, the prayer Our Father.
Yeah.
And I never participated, and I mean it was just that.
Yeah.
There was twice a week where we were gathered in the gymnasium for singing and prayer, but again I didn't participate, and this is only something they do in this Catholic school, not something that takes place in the regular public schools.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, of course. I mean, similar thing is true in the Netherlands. The public schools don't do that. Aren't even. Well, there was a bit of a weird thing in primary school because when I attended 4th grade. Once a week for an hour, a local minister tried to teach us some biblical knowledge. Maybe you remember them, the great green felt boards with sticky pictures of Mary and Joseph and donkey and
yeah, we didn't have the same sort of biblical class there. We had religious studies, but by law, you cannot only teach one religion. You have to teach all religions. And that goes even for the Catholic school. But we did read the Bible from start to finish.
Ooh, that's good, I think.
Yeah, that's
even the naughty bits.
Every single page, yes. And I raised a lot of questions that wasn't appreciated very much. So I got kicked out of Bible class a lot.
I must admit that I did follow religious education, and that depended. I mean, I had several teachers. Some of them were more of the teach-Roman Catholic tradition. Some of them did indeed do some Bible reading, and one of them did essentially stuff like sex ed. And other stuff that other teachers wouldn't want to touch. He was a good chap, and I, of course, was always asking questions, often very nasty questions. So I had a bit of a rebel spirit in me. That's, let's say, my classmates loved that. I mean, they wouldn't dare to ask us questions. And of course, I didn't care.
Yeah, and that's actually a big part of how I never actually believed in religion. It was sort of the reluctance or complete inability to answer any questions that I had. Before I started in school, I had experienced the International Women's Rights Day, or Fight Day. I don't remember what it's called in English, but the equality right of sexes from the 1960s fight is being celebrated every year in Denmark since it happened. And a couple of weeks before starting to read the Bible, I had seen in the news this big talk about the International Women's Rights Day, and a lot of prominent women were talking about how great it was to have equal rights. And then we started reading the Bible, and there's this very particular passage in Genesis 2 that right after the fall, the man and the snake gets penalized, and then the woman gets penalized, where she is specifically told, and it's one of the few times up until God speaks to Mary through the Holy Spirit, where God speaks directly to women or a woman, and he tells her that you will give birth in pain, and you have to serve your husband, and he has to rule over you. Now, I've looked up in many dictionaries. There is only one interpretation of the word rule. That is, what I say goes, and you get no say. You have no right to even question what I'm demanding of you. If I rule you, I'm your king, your emperor, or something similar. No say, no rights. So naturally, I had a question. How can we be a Christian country if we have equal rights between the sexes, between men and women, if our own God says directly that men rule over women? And our teacher had no interest in answering the question. She just kicked me out of class.
As we do. Yeah, it's weird. I have no particular example in my head at the moment of the kind of questions that, I mean, I never got kicked out of class. It wasn't like that. It was more like asking questions that the teacher didn't like or couldn't answer. I mean, I remember when we were doing stuff like, there was there was something to do in the local church. There was a, let's say, dissident priest who, he didn't like essentially lots of the stuff that the bishop told him to do, so he started a breakaway church, I think. And so he got kicked out of the church and the priesthood. And so at that time, I was 16 or so, I don't remember exactly, but I was also a editor of the school paper. So I went to look him up and had an interview with him. And weirdly enough, that got me in hot water.
Yeah, I can see how that would happen. Yeah,
I mean,
I think another part of the reason I was never convinced about religion was I had seen a lot of documentaries about astronomy and biodiversity and evolution and all that kind of stuff, because Denmark has a strong scientific community and a strong education system. So TV in Denmark was full of documentaries back then, where it was a lot of it was mostly actually in English with Danish subtitles. So from the second on, I was able to read the subtitles. I watched documentaries about just about anything, and that meant that I had already learned about how the universe was created or came to be through the astronomy documentaries, and then was told a completely different story from the Bible that, quite frankly, made very little sense.
Yes.
Even to a 7-year-old.
Yeah, I was in a similar situation. Both from TV documentary, but also quite a bit of a reader. I still am, by the way. I read lots of biology, astronomy, physics, stuff like that. And so when the Bible makes comments about bats being birds, hey, that's weird.
Yeah, it actually, in my opinion, one of the silliest things in the whole Bible is Genesis and the creation story.
Yes.
Because nowadays people go to great lengths to interpret the words just to try and make it fit what we know in science today. So they go and say things like, well, it wasn't actually a 6-day creation. A day back then was a lot longer. And a lot of crazy things like that. Because if it was a lot longer, why didn't God just dictate the story as, well, I created the universe, waited 8 point something billion years, and then I created the sun, and then I waited a couple of 100 million years and then created the earth, because then it would match what we observe. There's no need for God to tell this stupid story about how it takes 6 days when it takes, in fact, billions of years.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, my religious teachers, at least one of them, tried a similar thing, not so much about the days of indeterminate length, but essentially the biblical days standing for possibly million-long eras. But of course, then that doesn't work either, because that's not how it doesn't describe evolution. It doesn't.
Yeah, that's another thing. And even in just the creation story, apparently God is just hovering over some water, and then he separates the waters below from the waters above. But there's no explanation of what the waters above are. I mean, it fits perfectly with an ancient story about a flat Earth under a sky dome sort of thing, and I can see how people would believe that. If you look at the night, if you look at the oceans at night, they're almost black, and the night sky is black. And if you look at the oceans at day, it's blue, and the daily sky is blue. If you look at the foam on a wave, it's grayish, kind of like a cloud is gray. So I could see how they could believe there was waters above some sort of dome.
Yes, and of course, occasionally it falls down.
Of course, now we know that there's no waters above. There is space. There's a vacuum.
Yes.
So,
I mean, I have no problem understanding it like that. I mean, people try to describe the way they understood the world to be, which was wrong, but they didn't know any better. And I mean, it took, well, I mean, I think that not even the ancient Greeks understood really what the heavens were.
yeah, I mean, I believe it was around the ancient Greeks that invented astrology,
Yes.
sort of by believing that the stars were gods, looking through this heavenly carpet and adjusting lives for us down here. And that's how we've gotten to having astrology these days.
Yes, and well, of course, astronomy and astrology were the same thing, roughly until the Middle Ages.
Until the invention of the telescope.
Yeah, a bit earlier. Your famous countryman Bari did the astronomy by naked eye to a high level, but that's probably pretty much the first one to do actual observation as we understand astronomy today.
Yeah, and there's a lot of interesting discussions to be had about astrology, because people to this day swear by these obviously almost ridiculous ideas that somehow a planet's orbit aligning in a certain way with another planet should somehow affect your life or the way you behave.
Yeah.
It's kind of silly. It is silly.
It is silly. I mean, I know quite a few people who read the horoscope in the newspaper each day. Not so much because they believe in it, but it's amusing. Well, okay.
Yeah,
but
I had my fun with that, because I would specifically read the wrong horoscope to my sister. And she would always go, yeah, that's perfectly me. Yeah, sorry, but that's Aquarius, not Capricorn. So sorry.
I mean, I've never
you.
taken that bit of astrology serious. I mean, even the more in the horoscopes that take look like things when you were born, what time of day. Even that nonsense, but at least it does a bit more hand waving. But of course, there's the other bit that essentially, when you're a Leo, as I am, you're supposed to have certain characteristics. That's even worse when one believer in astrology tried to explain to me that it's typically Leo not to believe in that.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny, because what are they going to do in a couple of million years when some of the stars that form these images in the sky are so far away due to the expansion of the universe that they can no longer actually see these stars?
Yes, and I mean, when precession has moved the whole side 20 or 30 degrees, I mean, of course, it's nonsense. But I mean, I understand that that kind of magic, of course, is difficult to shake off. And of course, even TANG made money from drawing horoscopes.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of religious types refer to guys like Newton, who was a religious person, but did this whole gravity thing. But one thing
Yes.
they kind of forget is that he actually spent a lot more time on alchemy and try and convert lead into gold.
Yes.
So even though he was brilliant with his ideas about gravity, he was quite foolish about other things, because at Newton's time, most of the people who were into alchemy had left behind the idea of the philosopher's stone and converting things into gold, because they had realized by all their experimentation that it couldn't be done.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, we, with our modern science, have actually managed to collide atoms together and formed a radioactive form of gold.
Yes, in tiny amounts, but and at a weird expense. But yes, we can do it. I mean, the interesting thing here. I mean, I read a bit of it. I didn't read Newton's alchemical work. I mean, there's very little of that left.
Yeah, that's one of the few superstitious pseudosciences that have actually stayed with us.
Yes, but I mean, the interesting bit is, I mean, it's obvious that Newton was of the opinion, I'm a genius, I can crack alchemy, just like I cracked gravity.
Yeah,
and of course that didn't work, but that doesn't make the effort less valiant, perhaps. I mean, it must have been very frustrating for him that alchemy didn't fall apart like gravity did, or stuff like that. That must have been very frustrating for him. I mean, and of course, I mean, he also was a very religious man, and of course, a dissenter. He wasn't. He was a Unitarian, and that was not, let's say, Church of England orthodoxy.
Yeah,
and that got him in some hot water.
Yeah, and that's actually very common for a lot of great scientists throughout history, that in some way or another, either their ideologies about religion or their scientific work got them in hot water with whatever church ruled the area they were living in.
Yes, I mean, well, we have. I mean, I'm not so fond of the way some people describe something like a war between religion and science. It's not exactly like that. I mean, there are examples of that. I mean, Galileo, for instance, but I think most of what we now call the Enlightenment wasn't like that. But
that's true.
Yes, it's been there. But, and on the other hand, I'm particularly in astronomy, I'm well aware that from the Catholic Church brought about quite a few good astronomers.
Yeah, and that's because astronomy showed that the religious doctrine of Earth being the center of the universe was wrong.
Yes.
And
it took the church some time to recognize that, several centuries actually.
But I think we can be very happy that that sort of religious power is no longer present in our societies.
Yes.
Because if every scientific progress had to be made through the blood of scientists in this way, to this day, we would probably still be shitting in outhouses. we wouldn't have planes. We wouldn't have satellites and GPS. We wouldn't have satellite TV. We wouldn't be sitting here with a webcam and a microphone talking to each other. That wouldn't be an option, because that sort of communication would never have existed.
Presumably, I mean, it's difficult to say. I mean, the speculative history is not exactly my thing.
Well, you can actually tie pretty well together where royal families took over power and took it away from the churches, were countries that quite rapidly started to develop technology after that happened, because there was no longer any religious stigma against pursuing knowledge and technology.
That sounds accurate.
Take for instance, just France and England. France were a lot slower to sort of tone down the religion, the church's power, being a Catholic country, where the Church of England was in England, and it was much less powerful. It didn't have a global hold or hold over most of Europe like the Catholic Church had. So it was much less powerful. And England for many years were the first to make steam engines and railroads, and just the technology of shipping was something the French stole through espionage from the British. Cannons, all kinds of technologies was developed in Britain because the church didn't have the power to prevent it.
That may be the case, but I mean, at least I agree that, I mean, my own nation definitely got going when we kicked out the Spanish and went on a republic, the Dutch Republic. You may have heard of that. And I mean, for many centuries, the Netherlands was one of the main scientific, hotspots in Europe. And of course, in maritime technology. Hello.
And it's also important to point out how religion in some ways shot itself in the foot, because it actually encouraged the development of the printing press, which made it easy to spread information quickly and mass produce books with information in them. So the church very early on actually supported and funded the development of the printing press, which essentially caused their own demise in many ways.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are several interesting bits to that. Of course, it's interesting that the first printed book in the West was the Bible, Gutenberg's Bible. You may well be aware of that. And that almost in itself kicked off the Reformation.
Yeah, that's true. But only by not limiting who could read the Bible.
Exactly.
Could that sort of widespread discussion about the Bible happen?
Yes.
By making sure the Bible was translated into different languages and spread out to so many people, the church could no longer control who read it and how they interpreted it.
Yes. I mean, to this day, Roman Catholic theology is not particularly deep in Scripture. I mean, their own tradition are just as important.
Yeah, and it kind of shows how unserious the whole thing is, because the church doesn't find the book that they are founded upon important enough to actually be the foundation of their own religion.
As a matter of fact, I think that's not a bad thing. I mean, after all, of course, the Bible is such a large book with so many different and even contradictory things in it that every theology is essentially a cherry picking of the Bible.
Yeah, and it's necessary.
Yes.
You can't create a coherent church if you take every single part of the Bible
Exactly.
literally.
Yes. And that's true for every theology, whether it's Protestant, Calvinism, Lutheranism, some other minor things, evangelicalism. It's all the same. And the Roman Catholic Church is, of course, well, in of itself, I think the largest Christian church. I don't know exactly the numbers; it's not important. And they used to forbid lay people to read the Bible, and they're still not pushing it.
Yeah.
I mean, in that respect, I was a bit surprised to learn that in church you read the complete Bible.
Yeah, well, that's because of the Danish laws superseding what religions
Oh, yes, of course.
wants to do. Of course, there is a bit of interpretation as to what the law means, but this particular school interpreted that you had to teach all religions as you have to read through all religious texts.
Okay.
So I've read the Hindu scripture, I've read the Bible, I've read the Quran, everything through this Catholic school. Yeah, of course, it was straight Danish translations thereof because it had, according to the Danish law, we have to read it in a language we can understand.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. Some of my religious teachers did teach stuff about Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, a few other bits, but never with a deep dive into their scriptures or stuff like that. I later in life, I think when I was in my 30s, I tried to read the Quran. I never finished it. God, I mean, if the Bible is dull, the Quran is even worse.
Yeah, especially mostly because of the way it's written and how it's. I mean, if you've already read the Bible, most of the Quran is just an interpretation of the stories of the Bible, and with footnotes from Muhammad.
Yeah, a bit like that. I mean, it's been a while. I have a translation in Dutch in my bookcase, but I haven't opened it for 20 or 30 years. It's not really interesting. I'm not particularly interested in Islam. Maybe I should be, by the way, but I thought it a bit of a waste of time. And
Yeah.
of course, Hindu text, God, there's so much of that.
I actually kind of like the Hindu scripture because they are a lot more imaginative in many ways. They are further from reality in a way that you can sort of read it as fantasy rather than an attempt to being a description of how things are. It's been a long time since I've read it, but yeah, I actually like the Hindu scripture a bit more as a reading material because it's more creative.
Yeah, I imagine, yes, you're right. I read bits of the Ramayana, some other stuff, but I mean, I definitely have my favorites, like the elephant-headed god, what's his name? Ganesha. I mean, also, I mean, I just love Hindu imagery. 4 or 8 armed gods. It's much more inventive than silly old Christianity.
Yeah, it's a very creative religion in many ways, and entertaining. And it's
Yes.
not I mean, a lot of the Old Testament is supposed to be a historical lesson about how the Jews became God's chosen people and how they started to rule the world. And instead, it's basically just a book of mass murder. I mean, it's just a bunch of people who are technically family because of this massive inbreeding background we have, not only from Adam and Eve, but from later on Noah. So it's sort of like a bunch of families or one big family all killing each other for power, and it just ends up with blood everywhere. Where the Hindu scripture, they're kind of just funny stories in most cases.
Yeah. Okay. I want to change tack a bit. I mean, we're talking about how we engage with religion, but now I never lived a religious life. Did you in any way?
No. I was forced to sort of undergo the confirmation preparations in school, but I was never a believer, and I never believed any of what I was taught, which also led to, on the day of my confirmation, that I stood in front of the altar with the priest asking me if I renounced the devil and believed in God and all that, and I just said, no, I don't believe. And it actually, I think it was kind of funny, because just like Judas denied God 3 times before the rooster crowed, my priest asked me 3 times. When I had said no the first time, she repeated, do I renounce the devil, believe in God, and all that yada yada, a second time. And I said no. And she repeated it all a third time. And I said no a third time. And then she moved on.
Did any fowl let themselves be heard?
There was no birds to be heard, though. No,
okay.
Unfortunately. I was kind of hoping for it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I never believed anything of that. I mean, weirdly enough, I mean, for all those years, if I was asked, are you religious? No. I presented as, or identified as non-believer, or as called in Dutch, niks, nothing. And only in my 30s, in the 1990s, I realized that I'm an atheist.
Yeah, I was actually quite quick to realize that I was an atheist. I think it was about around the 2nd or 3rd grade. One night I saw a television program with Richard Dawkins, who was discussing religion with a couple of Catholic priests and a Protestant priest. I don't remember exactly what he was discussing with, but what I do remember is all his arguments. And I was transfixed to the TV listening to this guy talking against religion, and talking against all the religious arguments with his own arguments. And I remembered every single argument he made in that show that night, because I knew that I would need them in school against the believers in my school.
Yeah.
And it quite quickly after having seen that talk show or whatever it was, the classmates gave up trying to argue with me because I made good arguments. I made arguments from one of the masters, and they were unable to counter my arguments at any
Yeah.
point. So quite quickly they stopped coming to me with their own attempts at converting me into their religion, because they realized that it would never succeed.
Yeah, I had a similar. I mean, it took from the things that I was aware of Dawkins before I was 30, and that was because I read some of his books on biology, not
Yeah.
On atheism. But
Yeah, my favorite
Yeah, well-
book when I was a teenager was Mount Probable. Up Mount Probable. Yeah.
Climbing Mount Improbable.
Yeah. That's a great book.
Yes, it is. I mean, when I was 16, 17, something like that, I started to listen to the Dutch radio is weird. It has many different broadcasters. Most of them have something like, on each radio station have, let's say, 10 or 20 hours of transmission time a week. And there are a few small ones, typically religious or otherwise political organizations. And one of them was the Vrijdenkers, the freethinkers, but they call themselves like that. And one of their presenters, who did roughly 1.5 hour rant every week, Anton Constans. And he was not just a freethinker, he was also an anarchist socialist.
Oh, interesting. I wish I would have heard some of that.
He was brilliant. And I mean, I much more soaked up his political thing than his atheist bits. So, and he rarely called himself an atheist. He called himself a freethinker, and so I didn't really latch on with atheism, but I did latch on with anarchist socialism.
Yeah,
which
I have the anarchist from a different source. One just like me, Red Dwarf. In an early season, they go back in time and visit young Lister and his band, singing the song. And he introduces one of his guys as a neo-Marxist nihilistic anarchist. And I've always loved that terminology, neo-Marxist nihilistic anarchist. I've always thought of that being quite an awesome thing to be.
Yes. And I mean, I wandered a bit in politics, I must admit. When I was 18, I joined the Communist Party. That was a bit of a mistake.
Yeah.
But there you go.
I'm a member of the Danish Green Party, which used to be the Danish Communist Party back in the late 80s, early 90s. But they changed away from communism since the fall of the Soviet Union, and they've changed a lot of their ideologies to be much more basically hippie-like. They are much more just environmentalists and humanists now.
Yeah, I mean, the Communist Party, I was maybe a year in the party. I mean, I didn't like the internal political structure of the party a bit. It was rather Stalinist. And I didn't like that a bit.
That's one of the things that I also don't like about the Green Party in Denmark. They actually have a rotational rule where that if you've been elected, you can only be elected twice. Then you have to leave the party for a minimum of 4 years before you can run for an election again.
Okay. That's not that bad idea.
Well, the problem is that the party is quite small in Denmark. And one of the main reasons is that it's hard for them to actually get elected, once they actually have a good politician that gets elected, he gets re-elected for another term, but then they have to find someone else to replace him. And people have a hard time. People have a hard time electing someone who's completely inexperienced. So every other election or so, the Green Party loses a lot of votes.
Yeah.
Because they have to find a new person to be elected.
Yeah, I mean, just a little announcement. In November, we'll be having national parliamentary elections in the Netherlands. Government collapsed this spring. And it'll be interesting. I intend to do one of these episodes about that. Just to educate the world how party list proportional representation works. But we are living in interesting times because most parties are renewing their leadership and party lists and stuff like that. So it's interesting. And
yeah, it sounds like there's going to be a lot of new faces
yes, indeed.
for that election.
We'll have a new prime minister, which is good. Mr. Rutte has been prime minister far too long. So I intend to do an episode about that, but later, maybe early November or something like that. If you like, you can join the conversation.
Sure, absolutely. I'd love that. I love talking politics, even if it's a country I don't know much about the politics in. I'll make sure to read up on Dutch politics.
Yes, I intend to do a short introduction on Dutch politics, and then, well, go through different parties and what they intend to do and what I expect they will poll, and it'll be nice. Anyway, why do I say this? Because the party I will probably vote for is a combination of the Green Party, which indeed is one of the successful parties of the Communist Party, and the Labour Party. I've never liked that Labour much, even though it has given us a few very good prime ministers. There are reasons why I don't like them. But now Mrs. Timmermans, former Euro Commissioner for the Netherlands, will be party leader. And I have some hope he'll pull a good vote. So, interesting times.
Yeah, it sounds like it very much. There was a question in the chat that I actually like to address. It's how much does religion play a role in the politics here? In Denmark, very little. We have a Christian party, but last election, they actually got so few votes that they didn't get a single person in our parliament.
Yeah, in the Netherlands, when I became a voter, religious parties took something like 40% of the vote. In several different, in the Catholic Party and the Protestant Party, two Protestant parties actually. Now that's reduced largely. One day the main Catholic, the Protestant, two Protestant parties, got into one, CDA. They used to be large, but they are, have splintered and lost votes, and they are definitely on the way out. I wouldn't be surprised in the next election they'll get something like 1 or 2 seats in Parliament. But they've been in government for years. They've been in the last coalition for 2 or 3 cabinets. We have a few other. We have a very right-wing Christian party. We have a weirdly socially conservative but economically progressive Christian party. But in total, they pick up something like 20% of the vote.
Okay. Well, in Denmark, we only have one religious party, the Christian Democrats. And in the last election, they got 0.5% of the vote.
Oh, yeah.
And you actually need, in order to keep getting government funding, you need at least 2% of the vote. So they didn't get any seats in parliament, and they lost their government funding.
Good. I think, weirdly enough, we also have a not openly but mostly Muslim party, but they're not doing so well either. So I hope that the left can get themselves into government after the election. It's not certain. Government or coalition forming is difficult, may take months, unfortunately. But
yeah, we have a coalition government in Denmark right now, and it's actually across the center. So we have a slightly left-wing Social Democrats, and we have the Left Party, which is actually slightly right-wing, ironically. And we have two other parties, the Socialist Folk Party and the Moderates. And those four parties together form the government.
Okay. I am sorry that I really need to have a call of nature. Maybe we should just close the episode.
Yeah, and I'd love to be on again sometime.
Yes, I'd love to have you on. I see that in the chat there's Xandrius. Hello! He might be interested in a more political conversation as well. Anyway, thank you for being here, Björn. Love to have a talk with you. I hope the viewers loved it. And I say thank you all for being here and watching and chatting. And see you next time. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Oh, and stream. Looks like we're done.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're done. I have to run for a piss. I'll be back in a sec.
All right. I actually think the stream is still running. Yeah, we're still running. So, well, thank you for having me on, everyone. I guess I'm the only one still here. Yeah, if you've got any questions, feel free to ask in the live chat. I'll answer them if I can make it before Hein makes it back.
There we are.
I think we're still live.
Are we?
Yeah.
Doesn't look like it. Oh, and